seat. Welcome to the Beltline Church of Christ. So glad that you're here tonight. It is a pleasure to see your smiling faces again. It is a great, great evening, a great night, and I'm glad that you're here. This morning we finished our series of lessons on what if Jesus really meant what he said, and tonight we're going to finish our series of lessons from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. And we're going to look at verse 12. Go back one slide for me if you don't mind. And we're going to look at this verse right here that says, "For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous." Have you ever thought about that phrase, that metaphor, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayers? It goes on to say, but his face is against those who do evil. I want to talk about the eyes of God specifically tonight. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 3 says some interesting things about the eyes of God. First it says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and on the good. The New Century Version quotes that same verse this way: the Lord's eyes see everything. He watches both evil and good people. And I don't know about you, but immediately when I see that, when I see thoughts or things about the eyes of the Lord, there is an image that I can't get out of my head. There is a song that pops into my head that I sang when I was a kid, and I'm going to say thankfully because of what the song was to me. It's not in our book anymore, but it's the song, "Watching You." You remember that song? I almost asked Alan to lead it tonight, but I thought I'd be so scared when I got up I wouldn't be able to finish it. Here's how it goes. And I'm not saying it's a bad song. I'm just telling you my baggage in my own life looks at this song in a certain way, and it's not a positive way. Here's what the song says. Here's one verse. "All along on the road to the soul's true abode, there's an eye watching you. Every step that you take, this great eye is awake. There's an eye watching you." And then the chorus. "Watching you, watching you, watching you. Every day mind the course you pursue. Watching you, watching you. There's an all-seeing eye watching you." And that song is in the old sacred selections that I always used to lovingly refer to as the old scared selections. Because that's what that song does to me. It scares me to death. I look at that and I think, man, here is the image of God, right? I mean, it's a huge eyeball watching my every step. And I don't know, I kind of see it streaked with red, and I see some anger there. I kind of see this eye looking at me and ready to pounce when I make a mistake. That's kind of the way that song reads for me. That's just me. You might love the song, and I'm sorry I made fun of it if you do. But that's what that song says to me. There's this eye watching my every step. Who sang that song? Every step you take. That's what I see here, right? I just see this picture of God, and man, it just scared me to death. And Job 34 doesn't help. Job 34 says, "For his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. There is no darkness or shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves." And then there's David's words in Psalm 139. You remember this? He says to us in verse 1, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar off. You search out my path and my lying down, and you are acquainted with my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand on me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it." So what is David saying? What are the authors of the Bible telling us? I think they're telling us that God knows more about me than I really want him to know. At least that's what I see this verse saying. God knows more about me than I really want him to know. He has access to my every thought. He has access to my every action. He has access to every mistake that I've ever made in my life. Matthew 10 tells me that he knows the very number of hairs on my head. Now, while there weren't as many as there were last year, that's still something I don't know. And so what that verse says is, God knows things about me that I don't even know about myself. God knows all of it. How does that make you feel? God sees it all. He knows it all. Thoughts, actions, intents of the heart. How does that make you feel? There are really two major ways that we can respond. We can say, "Oh no, you mean God saw that time last week when I was acting like a fool? You mean God saw that?" And we can be, "Oh, Kind of like I was talking about with that Watching You song. You mean God has access to all that? He saw that? Or we can kind of see it from a positive light and say, oh yeah, hey, I did some good things, and God saw those things. And so the question tonight is, where do you land? When you think about God and the eyes of the Lord are watching the things that we're doing, where do you land? Are you in the oh no category, or are you in the oh yeah category? I have to tell you that my view of the eyes of God have changed over the years. I was definitely in the oh no category for the majority of my life, but I don't find myself there anymore. And what I've come to understand is, and what I believe that David is trying to tell us in Psalm 139, is not that God knows all things and understands all things, even though that's true, but that's not what David's trying to say. David is making the point that God knows me. Of the billions and billions and billions of people in the world, God knows me. And if you look back to Psalm 139, there are 6 ways that David says God has an intimate knowledge of us. The first thing he says is that God has searched me. He's searched me. He knows what I need. He knows what's on my heart. God has searched me. He goes on to say God knows me. Here's why that's important. Through His knowledge of me, God can understand my prayers. He can understand my struggles. He can understand the things that drive me crazy. He can understand the things in my life that I struggle with. He knows me. He searched me. He knows me. Number 3, God understands my thoughts. He sees them afar off. Nothing escapes Him at all. He knows my dreams, my fears, the things that make me anxious, the things that I love. He knows all of it. Number 4, He discerns my coming and my goings. It doesn't matter whether I'm resting or moving. God knows where I am. Whether I'm in California or Alabama, God knows where I am. God is familiar with my ways. Number 5, He knows my habits, my weaknesses, my strengths. He knows it. He knows it all. And finally, number 6, God knows my words. Before they come out of my mouth, God knows them. Have you ever had a relationship like that? You ever been with someone so long that you can finish their sentences before? I knew you were going to say that. I knew it. I knew that was the phrase that was going to come out of your mouth. That's one of the joys and curses of marriage, right? Right? That's kind of where it is. And so maybe, just maybe, if you answered, oh no, God sees that, maybe at this point in the lesson you're saying, all right, Steve, well, is there a place where I can go hide? Is there a place where I can get out of His view? And the answer is, there's not. There's no place that you and I can pull a blanket over our heads and pretend that God doesn't see. And the psalmist goes on in verse 139, verse 7, and says this, where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in the grave or Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely darkness shall cover me, and the light be about me, a light about me be as night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. The Lord sees everything. He watches both evil and good. I want to take you to a verse that really transformed my thinking about the eyes of God. And it's found in 2 Chronicles, of all places, chapter 16. Let's go together there. I think this is worth our time. 2 Chronicles, chapter 16, verse 7. How do you see God? How do you see the eyes of the Lord? Are they an oppressive view? Are they a discouraging, a ready to pounce on you in any disobedience that you have view? Or is it something else? And I'm hoping tonight that we can transform to something else, something better. Here in 2 Chronicles, chapter 16, Baasha, the wicked king of Israel, is trying to build a city called Ramah. And the reason he's building Ramah is to keep the faithful Israelites in the northern tribes from coming into Jerusalem and worshiping God the way they're supposed to. And so there's this really bad time in Israel that's going on right here. And Asa, who is the king of Israel, who does some good things but also makes some really bad decisions, makes one of those bad ones here. You see, Israel has aligned themselves with a king from Syria named Ben-Hadad. And Ben-Hadad is just not a very good person at all, to put it mildly. All right? So what Asa does, instead of calling on the Lord, he decides to take money to Ben-Hadad and say, hey, break your covenant with Israel and come into covenant with me. And then he knows that if he can do that, that the wicked king of Israel will stop building this city. All right? And so God says this to him in verse 7. At that time, Hananiah the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you relied on the king of Syria and did not rely on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Syria has escaped you. Were not the Ethiopians and the Libyans a huge army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, he gave them into your hand. Now here's the verse that changed my thinking. It's verse 9. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. We've already established that, haven't we? His eyes see everything. There's nowhere we can go from his presence. He sees it all, good, evil, all of it. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is righteous or blameless toward him. Think about that. His eyes are not looking at us to pounce on our disobedience. His eyes are going to and fro, watching everything so that he can be our strong support when we need it. Fundamentally changed the way I viewed God at a very young age simply by reading this amazing little story in the middle of an obscure book in Chronicles. His eyes are not against us. His eyes are for us. And so Peter comes along in 1 Peter chapter 3, and he's trying to tell us how to live the good life. And he says, if you want to live the good life, then you got to keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from speaking deceit. And you got to turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Let me try to illustrate it this way. Several years ago, an Eastern newspaper recorded this amazing story. One evening, a woman was driving home when she noticed a huge truck behind her that was driving uncomfortably close to her. She did what most of us would do. She stepped on the gas to try to gain some distance between her and the truck, but when she sped up, the truck sped up. The faster she went, the faster the truck went. At this point, she's starting to get a little scared, and so she exits the freeway, but the truck stays with her. The woman then turned up a main street hoping to lose the big truck in traffic. But the truck ran a red light and continued to pursue her. At this point, she's reaching the point of panic. She pulls her car into a service station and she bolts out of her car and is screaming for help. It's then that the truck driver stops, jumps out of his own truck, runs toward the car, yanks the back door open, and pulls out a man who was hidden in her back seat. The woman was running from the wrong person. From his high vantage point, the truck driver spotted a would-be rapist in the woman's car. And all his efforts, the chase wasn't an effort to harm her. The chase was an effort to save her, even at the cost of her own safety. And I think it's the perfect illustration of what so many people are doing today. They are running from God. They are running from Him, fearing that He's going to pounce on me. He's going to destroy me. He's going to be one of those, He's just going to be, whenever I've made a mistake at home, I've gotten in trouble for it. That's our God. That's who He is. That's what God is. And nothing could be further from the truth. And we're running from the wrong person because God's plans for us are not evil. His plans for us are for good. His plans are to rescue us from hidden sins that endanger our lives. And it seems that David, from what we read in Psalm 139, understood that. He knew that the eyes of the Lord were for him, not against him. And that's why he says what he says here in 1 Peter 3. And that's why he finishes Psalm 139 like this. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. and see if there's any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. You see, David's words can only be spoken by someone who feels completely loved and completely accepted by God. One whose hunger for God has been satisfied. These words can only be spoken to the one who unconditionally loves the person he is watching. And so here's the point tonight. God sees every square inch of your life. God sees every square inch of my life. And yet, He still loves me unconditionally. And He still loves you unconditionally. He knows my successes and my failures. And there have been plenty. Failures, not successes. He sees my strengths and my weaknesses. God understands how unholy I can be. And He loves me anyway. Now, God expects me to let Him to continue to perform surgery on my life. God expects me to allow Him to get rid of the bad stuff that I do in my life. But all along the way, He never withholds His love. Because God's love isn't based on my performance. Thank the Lord for that. 1 Peter 3:12, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and His ears are open to their prayer. The face of the Lord is against those who practice evil. We got to see that word practice there. Yeah, we're going to make mistakes. Yeah, we're going to fail. But if we are trying to do God's will, if we're moving in His direction, His eyes aren't against us. His eyes are for us. Yes, God is an all-seeing eye. But the eyes of the Lord are eyes of caring, not punishment. They are the constant view of a loving parent or a true friend, not the stinging, oppressive view of a constant critic. That's not our God. And instead of being swollen in anger and streaked with red, the Lord's eyes, as He looks at us, gleam with a mother's joy and a father's approval. And I can't help but think, if you'll look long enough, you might even see that all-seeing eye wink at you. Not because or at your failures. I think you might see Him wink at you because of where you are heading. And hopefully, that is to the throne room of God in heaven forever and ever and ever with Him for all eternity. I hope that your view of the eyes of God can be changed tonight. From not, oh no, God saw that, to, you know what? God saw that and He loves me anyway. Because the eyes of the Lord are for us. They're not against us. And if you take nothing else from the lesson tonight, remember that if you're running from God, you're running from the wrong person. And instead of running from Him, I want to encourage you tonight to run to Him. And if we can help you as you do that, we invite you to come right now while together we stand and sing this song for your